The winner is Julie Andrews. Thank you very much for this lovely honor. Julie Andrews was once known as the picture of perfection, but behind the scenes, her real life was far from a fairy tale. After 40 years of silence, Julie finally opened up about the heartbreak that nearly broke her. What really happened behind closed doors, and why did she finally decide to speak out after all these years? Join us as we uncover the untold story of Julie Andrews' most private heartbreak, the darling of stage and screen. Julie Andrews is one of those rare stars who seemed destined for greatness from the very beginning. Born Julia Elizabeth Wells in 1935 in Walton, on Thames, England, she came from a family deeply involved in music and performance. Julie had what's called a 4-octave vocal range, which means she could hit incredibly high notes most singers can't even dream of reaching. It didn't take long for her talent to be noticed by people in the music world. By the time she was just 12 years old, Julie was already performing on the West End, which is London's version of Broadway. At that young age, she was already seen as a kind of musical prodigy. She didn't start out in film or television. She started in music halls and stage performances, impressing audiences with her beautiful singing. Her big break in London came when she performed in the show Starlight Roof. In this variety show, she wowed the crowd with Jesuit Titania from the opera Mignon, a piece so difficult that even trained adult opera singers avoided. Yet here was a young girl singing it with ease. Julie's early success in London led her to Broadway in the United States. At only 19 years old, she was cast in one of the most important roles of her early career, Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady. This role made her a star in New York. Audiences couldn't get enough of her performance as the Cockney flower girl who gets transformed into a proper lady. Julie wasn't just singing beautifully, she was acting with skill and bringing real personality to the role. The show was a massive hit, and soon Julie Andrews was a major name in both London and New York theater. But even with her huge success on the stage, Julie wasn't yet the international superstar that most people know today. That moment came with the movies. Julie Andrews made her film debut in a way that would change her life forever, with the role of Mary Poppins in 1964. Walt Disney personally wanted her for the part after seeing her on Broadway. At first, Julie wasn't sure she wanted to take the role, but Disney was patient and waited for her. The gamble paid off. Mary Poppins was a giant success around the world. Julie played the magical, clever nanny who floats into the lives of the Banks family and teaches them about kindness, imagination, and fun. She won the Academy Award for Best Actress for this role, beating out Audrey Hepburn's performance in My Fair Lady, which was a strange twist. Julie had originated that role on Broadway, but wasn't cast in the film. Winning the Oscar was sweet proof that she belonged on the big screen. And if Mary Poppins made her a star, The Sound of Music in 1965 made her a legend. Playing Maria von Trapp, the cheerful music-loving governess who changes the lives of a strict widower and his children in Austria, Julie brought energy, heart, and joy to the role. The film was another worldwide smash hit. Even today, people still sing songs like Do Re Mi and My Favorite Things, all made famous by Julie's beautiful singing voice and warm acting. By the time she finished The Sound of Music, Julie Andrews wasn't just famous. She was beloved by millions across the world. Throughout the 1960s, Julie Andrews became a symbol of wholesome femininity. She was beautiful, talented, and carried herself with grace. Audiences saw her as a picture of perfection. A lovely Englishwoman with impeccable manners, a dazzling smile, and a voice that could make people cry with happiness. Magazine covers called her America's sweetheart, even though she was British. People wanted to be like Julie. Women admired her elegance and charm. Men admired her beauty and intelligence. Parents trusted her, and children adored her. She wasn't just an actress. She was part of the family in people's living rooms. But what many didn't realize at the time was that behind the sweet and graceful public image was a woman who was sharp, witty, and very ambitious. Julie wasn't someone who sat quietly and waited for roles to come to her. She worked hard for every part she got. Directors respected her not just for her talent, but for how prepared and professional she was. She had a clever sense of humor, too, often using playful sarcasm or dry wit in interviews. Behind the perfect smile was a mind that was quick, determined, and thoughtful. As the 1960s went on, Julie faced the challenge of meeting everyone's high expectations while also trying to live her own life and grow as a person and artist. She wanted more than just to play sweet roles in musicals. She wanted to explore deeper, more complex parts and prove that she was more than just a beautiful voice and a kind smile. Julie Andrews had become one of the most famous women in the world. But even with all that fame, her personal life was far from simple. And soon the pressures of fame and personal choices would lead to one of the most talked about moments of her private life, her divorce. And that's exactly where we're heading next. Julie's real-life love story and how it all started to fall apart. The love story. Before Julie Andrews became a world-famous star, before she was known as Mary Poppins or Maria von Trapp, she was simply a talented young girl with big dreams. And around that same time, she met someone who would become one of the most important people in her life. Tony Walton. Julie first met Tony when they were both just kids. They were about 12 years old and both involved in a school production of Humpty Dumpty at the London Hippodrome. Julie was already a rising young star in stage performances, and Tony was a creative boy with a love for drawing, design, and theater. Even at that young age, there was a special connection between them. It wasn't just about romance, it was about a shared love for the arts. They both wanted creative careers, they both loved theater, and they both understood what it meant to have big ambitions even as teenagers. That early attraction grew over time into something deeper. As they grew older, their friendship developed into a romance. They were both ambitious, driven, and full of dreams. Julie was busy with her rising career in singing and acting, and Tony was starting to make a name for himself in the world of stage and costume design. They seemed like the perfect match, a talented singer and actress and a brilliant designer, each creative in their own way. In 1959, when Julie was 24 years old, she and Tony got married. At the time, Julie was already doing very well in the theater world. Thanks to her starring role in My Fair Lady on Broadway, Tony was beginning to break through in his own career as a designer. Working on sets and costumes for plays and musicals, the two of them supported each other's work. Julie's beauty, talent, and charm fit perfectly with Tony's creativity and artistic skill. Together, they made an impressive pair, especially in London's creative circles. People admired them not just for their talents, but for how well they seemed to work together as a team. Their partnership wasn't only in their personal life, but also in their professional life. A great example of their creative collaboration was Mary Poppins. When Walt Disney offered Julie the role of Mary Poppins, Tony was hired to work as the film's set and costume designer. It was a perfect combination of their talents, Julie in front of the camera and Tony behind the scenes, helping to build the magical world of the film. Tony's work on Mary Poppins was widely praised, and he went on to become an award-winning designer in both theater and film, eventually winning an Academy Award for All That Jazz years later. For a time, they really did seem like the golden couple of the arts world. Beautiful, talented, and surrounded by success, Julie and Tony looked like they had it all. They had a daughter, Emma Walton Hamilton, born in 1962, which made their family seem complete. They were the artistic equals of their creative scene, or so it appeared on the outside. But behind closed doors, things weren't as easy as they looked. The truth was, Julie's career was moving much faster than Tony's. While Tony was successful, Julie's fame was skyrocketing in a way that neither of them could have predicted. Mary Poppins was a worldwide hit, and just a year later, The Sound of Music became one of the biggest movies of all time. Suddenly, Julie wasn't just a stage actress or a singer. She was a full-blown movie star known around the world. With fame came new pressures. Julie's schedule became packed with movie roles, interviews, and travel. She was often away on film sets for weeks or even months at a time. Tony's work was mostly based in New York or London, meaning they were often living apart. These long separations started to take a toll on their relationship. On top of the distance, there was another problem: the growing imbalance in their careers. Tony was a respected designer, but he wasn't getting the same level of attention or fame as Julie. It's hard on any relationship when one person is suddenly in the spotlight, on magazine covers, winning awards, and constantly being celebrated, while the other works hard but stays mostly in the background. Even though they loved and supported each other, the strain of that imbalance quietly grew between them. Julie has spoken about this in her autobiographies, Home and Homework. She never blames Tony and never talks badly about him, but she is honest about how hard it was. She describes how difficult it was to be pulled in two directions, toward the career she had worked for all her life and toward the family she loved deeply. She talks about feeling guilty for being away so often, missing key moments with her family, and feeling the emotional weight of that choice. Being a wife, a mother, and one of the most famous women in the world was exhausting. It wasn't something she could talk about much at the time, because the public wanted to believe she was just like the cheerful, capable characters she played on screen. But in reality, she was dealing with emotional struggles. She wanted to be there for her husband and her daughter, but her career was calling her louder than ever. Julie also hinted at how emotionally she and Tony started to drift apart. There wasn't a single big dramatic event that caused their marriage to break. It was more like a slow separation fueled by distance, busy schedules, and different emotional needs. By the mid-1960s, even though they still worked together from time to time, their relationship had changed. In interviews later in life, Julie described this period as one of deep conflict. She didn't want to lose her family, but she also didn't want to give up the opportunities she was being offered. And at that time, there wasn't a lot of support for women dealing with these kinds of choices. There were very few examples of women who managed to balance huge careers in Hollywood with happy marriages and family life. Julie tried, but it was incredibly hard. Cracks in the fairy tale. Julie's marriage to Tony Walton came to an official end in 1967. They had been married for 8 years, but by the time they divorced, their relationship had been drifting for a while. It wasn't a sudden breakup. It was the result of years of growing apart, both personally and professionally. The announcement of their divorce was big news, especially because of who Julie was to the world at that time. People were shocked. How could Mary Poppins be divorced? How could Maria von Trapp have a marriage that didn't work out? These were the kinds of questions fans and the press were asking. Julie Andrews had played two of the most wholesome, cheerful, and kind characters in movie history, and now she was going through a divorce. To many people, it didn't fit with the image they had of her. The media covered the divorce, of course. Back then, journalists didn't write about celebrities' personal lives in the same harsh or aggressive ways we sometimes see today. But they were still curious. Reporters wanted to know what went wrong. They wanted details. Even though the coverage was respectful on the surface, by today's standards, it would feel a bit intrusive. The press wanted to keep Julie on a pedestal as the sweet, talented star everyone admired, but at the same time, they were eager to peek behind the curtain of her personal life. Julie herself didn't speak much about the divorce at the time. Like many stars of her era, She kept her personal struggles private, at least in public interviews. But later in life, she opened up more about what really happened and why the marriage didn't survive. In her memoirs and interviews, Julie explained that it wasn't anyone's fault in particular. There wasn't any big scandal. There wasn't cheating or fighting or betrayal. The simple truth was that their lives were moving in different directions. Julie's career had taken off faster and bigger than anyone had expected. Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music made her an international superstar, and that meant she was constantly traveling, filming, promoting, and performing. Meanwhile, Tony was building his own career, but in a very different way. He worked behind the scenes as a designer, creating beautiful sets and costumes. But his work didn't bring him the kind of public fame that Julie was experiencing. That created an imbalance. Julie has described it as their paths starting to separate. It wasn't something they wanted to happen, it just did. There was also pressure from Hollywood. Becoming a global star comes with new opportunities, but it also brings stress. Suddenly, Julie was being offered more roles, asked to attend events, and pulled into the world of fame in ways that made it harder to focus on family life. There were also people around her like agents, producers, and directors, who likely encouraged her to stay focused on her career because she was in demand. Julie was ambitious. She loved her work, but loving her work also meant being away from her husband and her young daughter for long periods of time. Later reflections from Julie were very honest. She said that both she and Tony tried to make it work. They still cared about each other, but they couldn't bridge the emotional distance that had grown between them. By the time the divorce became official, it was clear to both of them that they had drifted apart, not because of anger, but because of the different paths their lives had taken. One of the reasons Julie's divorce didn't turn into a public scandal was because of the quiet, respectful way they handled it. Neither Julie nor Tony spoke badly about the other. There were no harsh words in the press, no arguments played out in front of cameras, and no angry letters or accusations. Instead, they tried to keep things steady, especially for the sake of their daughter, Emma. Co-parenting was very important to both of them, and they managed to keep a friendly, supportive relationship over the years. Even after the marriage ended, they stayed in each other's lives, especially when it came to raising Emma and supporting her as she grew up. Interestingly, Julie didn't spend much time alone after the divorce. Not long after her marriage with Tony ended, she began a relationship with film director Blake Edwards. Blake was famous for directing movies like Breakfast at Tiffany's and the Pink Panther series. Their relationship started off a bit awkward, as Julie later admitted in interviews, but it eventually became one of the most important relationships of her life. While her marriage to Tony had been a partnership between two creative young people starting out, her relationship with Blake would be something deeper, more complicated, and lasting for decades. But at the time, to outsiders, it may have looked like she moved on quickly. Meanwhile, Tony Walton's career didn't slow down either. He continued to work in theater and film, designing sets and costumes for many well-known productions. His creativity was widely respected in the theater world. Eventually, he won an Academy Award for his work on All That Jazz in 1980 and continued winning awards throughout his life. While Julie's fame remained more public, Tony built a lasting legacy in the design world. What makes this story stand out is how both Julie and Tony managed to move forward in their personal and professional lives without letting bitterness or blame define them. Divorce is often messy and painful, but they handled theirs with maturity. They knew that life had pulled them apart, but they also knew that they still shared something important, their daughter and their early creative years together. And as Julie would later reveal, the emotional pain of that divorce eventually led her to make one of the most important choices of her life. Julie breaks silence. After her divorce from Tony Walton in 1967, Julie faced a period of personal confusion, sadness, and emotional struggle that she kept hidden from most of the world. It wasn't until many years later that she opened up publicly about the toll that time took on her, and how therapy helped her survive it. Julie Andrews has always been known for her honesty, even though she's usually quite private about her personal life. But as she grew older and started writing memoirs and giving in-depth interviews, she began to share more about the emotional weight she carried after her divorce. She spoke openly in interviews with outlets like NPR, The Guardian, and even with Oprah Winfrey about the hard moments behind the scenes of her glamorous life. In one interview, she shared something deeply personal. "I went into therapy, and it saved my life." These words showed just how serious the emotional fallout was after her marriage ended. For someone as famous as Julie to admit needing therapy in that era was rare. Today, many celebrities and public figures talk openly about mental health, but back then, especially in the 1960s and 70s, therapy was often treated as something to be embarrassed about. It was sometimes seen as a weakness or something that only people with serious emotional problems needed. And for someone like Julie, who had been made into an international symbol of goodness and control, admitting that she was struggling inside was an act of bravery. Julie later explained that the divorce wasn't just about the end of a marriage, it was about a kind of emotional collapse. On the outside, she was still working, performing, smiling, and living in the public eye. On the inside, she was dealing with confusion, guilt, sadness, and a feeling of being lost. She described therapy as the outlet where she could finally express all the feelings she had kept bottled up inside for so long. While she played characters who were steady and nurturing, in real life she was battling what she once called inner chaos. Therapy became the place where she could take off the mask and be honest about her feelings. She also talked about how confusing it was to feel sadness, guilt, and emotional pain at a time when she was supposed to be celebrating professional success. Her films were winning awards, her name was known around the world, and yet she felt broken inside. Therapy gave her a safe space to talk about all of it, the good, the bad, the guilt, the pain, and everything in between. One of the biggest challenges during this time was balancing her emotional healing with being a mother. Julie had a young daughter, Emma, who needed love, care, and stability. Even as Julie's world felt like it was falling apart, she worked hard to make sure Emma's life didn't feel that way. But it wasn't easy. In later interviews, Julie spoke openly about the guilt she felt during that time. She wanted to be the perfect mother, but she knew she wasn't always able to give Emma her full attention because she was struggling emotionally. Despite this, Julie did everything she could to keep life as steady as possible for her daughter. She stayed closely connected with Tony Walton, her ex-husband, so they could co-parent Emma in a supportive way. And while she may not have always felt strong on the inside, she did her best to stay steady for Emma's sake. That sense of responsibility was a big part of what pushed her to go to therapy in the first place. She didn't just want to heal for herself, she wanted to heal for her daughter. Over time, therapy helped Julie regain her balance. It gave her tools to process her emotions and better understand herself. She never pretended that it made everything magically better overnight. Emotional healing is a long process, and she has been clear about that. But with professional help and hard work, she slowly rebuilt her emotional health. By the time Julie wrote her memoirs, Home and Homework, she was ready to be fully honest about those difficult years. She didn't just want people to know her as the cheerful singing star of classic movies. She wanted people to understand that life can be complicated, that emotional struggles are real, and that even someone who seems to have it all can go through deep pain and come out the other side stronger. Love after loss. After the emotional pain of divorce and the healing that followed, Julie Andrews wasn't necessarily searching for a new love right away. Her life was busy with work, motherhood, and learning how to take care of herself emotionally. But sometimes life brings new relationships when you least expect them. That's exactly what happened when she met Blake Edwards, a man who would completely change the course of her personal life. Julie and Blake's first meeting wasn't what you would expect from a great love story. In fact, it was awkward and even slightly dismissive. Julie once joked in interviews that their first interaction involved passing each other in cars outside a therapist's office in Beverly Hills. Blake, being the witty and sometimes sharp-tongued director that he was, made a comment to Julie about how long she was taking to get out of her car. Julie, who didn't know him well at the time, thought he was rather rude. That odd first encounter might have been the end of it, but life had other plans. Over time, they began to bump into each other in social circles, and something started to change between them. Blake was not only famous for directing films like Breakfast at Tiffany's and the Pink Panther series, but he was also known for being clever, sharp, and sometimes a little sarcastic. Julie, often seen as the picture of kindness and grace, turned out to be just as sharp and witty behind the scenes. Their personalities balanced each other in unexpected ways, and eventually they fell in love. Julie once said that their relationship developed slowly, and it wasn't always perfect in the early years. Blake was dealing with his own personal struggles, including battles with depression and chronic pain. Julie, on her side, was still healing from the emotional weight of her divorce from Tony. But despite these difficulties, something about their relationship worked. They didn't expect perfection from each other, and that gave their connection room to grow naturally. One of the biggest differences between her first marriage and her marriage to Blake was the dynamic of family life. By the time Julie and Blake were together, they were blending two families into one. Julie had her daughter Emma from her first marriage. Blake had two children, Jennifer and Jeffrey, from his previous marriage to actress Patricia Walker. Bringing all of these people together under one roof wasn't always easy, but it became a key part of their life as a couple. Later on, Julie and Blake made the choice to expand their family even more. They adopted two daughters, Amy and Joanna, from Vietnam. This decision added even more layers to their family life. Raising 5 children from different backgrounds, all with their own needs, was a big responsibility. But for Julie, motherhood was one of the most important parts of her life, and she embraced the challenge. She later said that her family was the center of her world, even while she continued to work in movies and theater. The relationship between Julie and Blake wasn't just about home life, though. They also worked together on several film projects. Blake directed films like Darling Lily and Victor Victoria, both starring Julie. Julie appreciated that Blake saw her as more than just the sweet, wholesome star that Hollywood had created. He encouraged her to take on riskier, more complex roles, helping her break out of the perfect image she had been stuck in after Mary Poppins and The Sound of Music. This showed the depth of their partnership, both personally and professionally. Julie and Blake stayed married for over 40 years until Blake passed away in 2010. Over the years, Julie spoke with deep love and respect for him, often calling him her one true love. Even though they both faced personal challenges along the way, they remained committed to each other, supported each other's work, and built a family life together that lasted for decades. If you enjoyed this look into Julie's life, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story like this.